"Arthur, you've lost your damn mind. Open up before I call someone to take you away," shouted my son-in-law, standing in front of the door of my new villa with his friends and suitcases. They had come for a month's vacation without my permission, expecting a free paradise. I told them to leave, and 10 minutes later, the police arrived. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Evan kept talking to the glass as if words could pry steel. His breath fogged a circle on the pane. The suitcases crowded my welcome mat like a quiet invasion. I rested my palm on the deadbolt. The metal was cool and certain. My hand didn't shake. Not today. He asked if I was really locking the family out. I told him I was locking peace in. I did not raise my voice. I did not explain. The ocean did the explaining for me in long, patient pulses beyond the deck. The patrol cruiser eased to a stop beside the cedar fence. No siren. Just the soft thud of a door and the measured steps of an officer who had seen worse scenes than this. He stood a few feet back from Evan and let the wind take the heat out of the driveway. His name tag caught a blade of light. Ruiz. He addressed me first through the glass. "Welfare check," he said. A family member called concerned. Would I be willing to step outside to speak on the porch? I unlocked the door and opened it a careful width. The hinge gave a tired sigh. I stepped out and pulled it shut behind me. The key stayed in my hand like a line I would not drop. I told him my name and my address and the date I closed on this property last week. I said I was safe and in full possession of my decisions. I handed over my driver's license and a manila folder. Deed copy, insurance binder, utility account confirmations. Paper weighs it when you've ignored your own boundaries for too long. It sits in the palm, heavier than it looks. Evan cut in to say I wasn't well. He said I was under stress since Ellen died and that Grace and he were simply taking care of the family by using the place while I adjusted. He gestured at the horizon like he had purchased the view. The two men behind him shifted their suitcases and stared at the boards of my deck. The beer can lowered a fraction. Officer Ruiz flipped through the pages. He matched my license to the deed and back to me without changing expression. He asked Evan for any written agreement for the use of the property. Evan's confidence thinned. He said family property again, but softer. The officer nodded once as if he'd heard that phrase more than he cared to count. He explained that, without my permission, this was a trespass. Guests, not tenants. I watched the world sink. Grace was still on speaker. She demanded to know what I thought I was doing. She said I was embarrassing her. She said we always share everything. I glanced at the phone but answered the officer. I said I was not in danger and I did not want a confrontation. I wanted my home to be my home. He understood. Some people only hear the word no when it arrives with a badge beside it. Evan asked if this was how I wanted to be remembered. I said I wanted to be left alone. He looked at the officer and tried to show outrage. "You are taking his side." The officer said he was taking the side of property law. The wind shifted and the sea smell pushed the campfire scent of their beer back toward the road. They stalled 2 minutes longer. It is hard to retreat when you walk in like an owner. Eventually, they lifted the suitcases and performed the long, slow retreat of men who see no cameras but feel watched by something older. The cruiser idled until their car turned out onto the lane. The officer returned my documents in a neat stack, each corner aligned. He asked again if I was safe. I told him I was safe now. He looked at the key in my fist and nodded like a man who understood the whole conversation had always been about that small piece of metal. When he left, the quiet fell with a clarity that almost rang. The gulls cut lower arcs. The glass held the imprint of Evan's forehead and the half-circle of breath that would take a moment to fade. I stood with the door behind me and felt the strange lightness that follows a decision you should have made years earlier. Not relief exactly, something colder and more honest. My phone trembled in my pocket. Grace again. I let it ring out. Then the text arrived. She wrote that she had never seen me act like this and asked whether I wanted to lose my only child. She added a line about telling people news this weekend and how I had ruined everything. I read it twice. The old part of me reached for an apology like a reflex. The new part of me let the message sit in the light until the glare washed the letters into simple black shapes that meant nothing. I made coffee. The kettle hissed, then calmed. I poured it into the cup my wife once used for Sunday mornings back in the inland house we sold. The steam lifted and curled and was gone. I stood at the counter and let the mug warm my fingers. The sea lay beyond the glass like a steady animal that wanted nothing from me. The key was on the counter near my hand. Small, heavy, enough. The phone rang again. Evan, this time. He said the neighbors would talk when they heard I had refused my own family the porch. He said people would call me cruel. He asked if I was proud. I told him I was done being ashamed of wanting quiet. He told me the world would see what kind of father I was. I told him the world was not invited either. The call ended without anger, only edges. The house hummed in that way new houses do before you belong to them. Refrigeration, distant vents, the colder sounds of a place still getting used to your footsteps. I walked the hallway and touched the walls as if to ask if they were real. The last boxes leaned against the study shelves. A stack of file folders glowed pale under the window. I sat and opened one. The paper smelled like printers and the clerk's counter at the county office the day I signed everything. My name is on every page. You do not realize how rarely you see your own name until you sign it this many times. It looks different when you mean it. A knock tapped softer than before. Not Evan. Someone measured. I opened to find my neighbor from 2 houses down, an older woman with a weathered ball cap and hands that looked like she still worked on things. She said she had heard voices earlier and wanted to check if I was all right. I said I was. She nodded toward the ocean and said, "Good. The water is the only loud thing we tolerate here." Then she offered her number on a scrap of paper for anything I might need. She did not ask what happened or who those men were. Some people understand that some questions are not kind to ask. I thanked her. She raised 2 fingers in a small salute and kept walking. The afternoon faded to a softer kind of gray. The glass held less of the outside and more of me. I watched the reflection of my own shoulders as if studying a man I had long avoided. A shape alone with a cup and a key, not a scene for pity, a scene for breath. The phone lit one more time, a final text from Grace. She wrote that she was calling someone about getting me assessed. She used words that say less than they threaten. She wrote about paperwork and safety and best interests. I placed the phone face down and slid the manila folder on top of it. Some things you cover with documents because feelings will only make them worse. The sky thinned into evening. The lock clicked once when I tested it, clean and solid. The sound felt like a signature. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the threshold to the study, where the last of the daylight collected. The air smelled faintly of salt and something green from the low cliffs. I breathed in and let the chest settle. People call it madness when you stop letting them move your furniture, your schedule, your money, your life. They call it unwellness when you decline to endorse their plans. I thought of my daughter as a child with skinned knees, the way she looked for me before she cried. I thought of the long line between that moment and this one, and how lines straighten when you stop pulling them into knots. Outside, the waves kept their count. In the hallway, the closet door stuck a little in the jamb, the way new paint does. I pressed the knob and the hinge gave that slow, sticky moan as it opened. The sound took me backward by itself to another room and another door and a work light over blue paper and the careful lines I used to draw for a living. I stepped into the closet where I had stored the rolled tubes of old plans. The paper was cool when I touched it. I closed my eyes for a breath, and the ocean folded into the hum of a drafting lamp in my hands. Every bridge I built could bear tons of weight, except the one between me and my daughter. I used to think steel was the most honest language on earth. A span either holds or it fails. No speeches, no apologies. You read the load, you choose the right chord, you trust the math. The office at night had its own weather, a hush held up by fluorescent hum and the soft thrum of the plotter feeding out blue paper. I liked the way lines behaved under my hand. I liked how a pencil could be sharpened back to promise. Grace would sit on the edge of my drafting table when she was small, swinging her legs, careful not to touch anything. She would ask why bridges have to be beautiful if they already have to be strong. I told her beauty is the part people carry home. She stored that and smiled like a keeper of secret treasure. Later, after homework, she would fall asleep in Ellen's chair by the window, a book tented on her chest. The kind of sleep you can only have when someone else is paying the bills on time. The chair is gone now. The shape it left is louder than any memory. When Ellen got sick, I measured time in appointment cards. Strength felt different then. It was not something you could draw. It was the steadiness of a hand on a cup that burns. After she was gone, the house began to echo, like a gym after the game, confetti of lists under my feet. I learned how to burn dinner responsibly. I learned the small mechanics of being two parents with one voice. I kept the lights on and the lawn trimmed and the grief busy. When Grace moved out, she called on Sundays, always late, always breathless, always halfway out the door to something more interesting. I told myself that is what growing up looks like. You build a bridge so they can cross, then you wave into the wind that replaces them. Years later, she brought Evan for a visit. He arrived with a polished smile and a hand that wanted to lead the handshake. He talked about potential like it owed him rent. In my kitchen, he used the word scale as if the world were built to his tape measure. He asked about my retirement and laughed when I said I was not ready to sit down. Grace watched me watch him and squeezed his arm as if to say, "He is safe, Dad. He is the door to my future." I wanted to believe her because wanting can pass for love if you let it. We had coffee at the dining table that still carried a white ring where a hot dish once taught me a lesson. Evan pulled out a tablet and showed slides with bright corners. A device, a platform, an app, a market thirsty, a deck of cards laid down with confidence. He did not know that the question he should fear is always simple. Where will you be when the first plan fails? He did not answer that question because I did not ask it. Grace spoke for him. "Dad, you will love Evan's project. It is our future." She said ours, but meant theirs. I heard it and smiled anyway. There is a particular kind of blindness that comes wrapped in gratitude for a child who still asks your permission. The idea started small and reasonable, a short bridge over a narrow creek. She said they were thinking of a down payment for a small place closer to the city. She said rent was a waste. She said the market was moving, and this was a window. She said if I sold the inland house, I could buy something by the water and still have enough to help a little. She said a little like a feather. We made a list on a legal pad, repairs to finish, a realtor to call, Ellen's china to pack. Evan took pictures with wide angles until even I wanted to buy a house I already owned. The open house was a parade of shoes and perfume. Grace walked each couple through like a docent. She opened the blinds to let the afternoon glow flatter the walls. She used the word potential a lot that day, too. I stood in the kitchen and poured paper cups of lemonade. People said it smelled like a good life here. That phrase every seller learns to pretend not to hear. When the offer came in, Grace clapped like a child receiving a bicycle on a porch at dawn. Evan calculated aloud and made generosity sound like a business plan. He laid out how some of the proceeds could seed the company. He said we can pay you back with interest once we scale. He said scale again, as though the word itself were collateral. At escrow, my signature traveled across more pages than seemed decent. Each time I wrote my name, it felt both heavier and less permanent. Grace sat beside me and touched my sleeve before each set of initials, as if to say yes, this is the exact right story. When the funds cleared, Evan sent a long message with charts and a roadmap. It looked, from a distance, like an intention. Grace forwarded a listing by the coast with a subject line that read, "Breathe." I told myself this was the shift we all needed, that water and light would wash something clean that grief had not finished. I did not notice that my daughter had helped lift one end of our life and slide it into a truck bound for someone else's plan. After I moved, Grace and Evan visited twice. They brought a gift basket and stories about investors who liked the deck and a pilot run that would change everything. We stood on the deck with the ocean making its patient case for indifference. Evan spoke into the wind as if it were listening. Grace leaned into my shoulder and said, "I am so proud of you." I wanted that to be enough. Pride has a bright sound in a quiet house. It fills corners fast and says, "Do not ask for anything louder." The calls shifted after that. They had a small gap, they said, a liquidity crunch, something short-term that needed a bridge. The word made me smile from an old habit, then made me put the phone down. A week later, it was the car that needed work, then a late fee on a storage unit, then an apartment deposit because the landlord did not understand how close the company was to its launch. I convinced myself these were pebbles, not the first rocks in a slide. I convinced myself that my help was for Grace, not a man who spoke fluently in weather he had never worked in. One evening, late, Grace came by alone. She looked tired in a way that could not be Instagrammed. She walked through the rooms without comment and sat in the dark until her breath slowed. She asked if I ever regretted selling the old place. The question had blank edges. I said I regretted lots of things, sometimes the wrong ones. She nodded and told me she was thinking about making a push. She said if I loaned a little more, Evan could secure a partner. She looked at me the way she used to look at me before the shot at the pediatrician. Brave and wanting. I made tea and let the kettle fill the silence. She took my hand. Dad, you will love Evan's project. It is our future. She said ours, but meant theirs. The second time it stung. I still let it happen. I did not keep a tally. Men like me were raised to believe that counting is petty when it is family. The ledger lives anyway, even if you never write it. It scratches at 3 a.m. until you admit the numbers exist. A month after that tea, the inland house was gone, the wires were sent, and Evan posted a picture of a rented office with a caption about the first chapters. Grace sent me a heart. I sent back a wave and stood at my window, wondering when I had learned to pretend the ocean was applause. The empty chair by the new window stayed empty. I tried to put a lamp there and some books, but the corner did not accept replacements. It preferred the company of absence. On certain afternoons, when the light angled across the blueprints I keep rolled in a bin, the lines would glow like nerves. I would slide one out and let it rest over the table, the lines precise, the annotations small and sure. Bridges do not flatter you. They do not care how you feel about them. They ask for the right answer and punish your guesses. I used to trust that simplicity. I wanted to again. The phone rang. The sound cut across the room like a bright blade. I let it ring once and picked up on the second. Grace had a voice made for good news. Dad, can we stop by this weekend? We want to see the water. We want to celebrate. I listened to the ocean breathe against the pilings and thought about chairs and blueprints and the exact weight a span can carry before something gives that you cannot get back. I told her to call ahead. I set the phone down and watched the last of the light slide off the paper. The house settled around me with the gentle creak of beams, remembering what they were built for. The first thing I saw was not them. It was their luggage claiming territory. 2 roller bags were parked side by side on my welcome mat like guard dogs, a cooler beaded with sweat, a stack of beach chairs with tags still hanging. The porch had been turned into a loading dock for a life I had not invited. Evan stood in the doorway as if doorways were made to lean on. Behind him, 2 friends inspected the view the way men inspect something they plan to use hard and leave early. The ocean lifted and dropped with the patience of a creature older than our noise. Arthur, good timing, he said as if I was late to my own threshold. We were just figuring out rooms. Grace told us about the place. She said you would be happy we are here. You are on my porch, I said. That is all you are. He laughed like we were starting a friendly game. Come on, this is family. 3 bedrooms, right? We will be ghosts. He snapped his fingers toward the bags. Boys grabbed the blue one. Kitchen stuff. Nobody moved. The one with the sunburn looked at his beer and then at me and swallowed whatever was next. The other shifted his weight and studied the boards of my deck like they might crack under bad decisions. I kept my hand on the door. The key stayed warm in my pocket. Inside the fridge, a bank notice reminded me when the next payment would be lifted from my account. Auto debit. Predictable. I had arranged my life to prefer that kind of certainty. This scene was the opposite. We are staying a month, Evan said. He made month sound like mercy. We already told people. We posted about it. Family summer. He smiled as if a caption were a contract. No, I said. He blinked as if the word had been outlawed. He shifted to the performance version of himself, the one with wider gestures and a voice that carries. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He lifted it like a small stage. Let us clear this up, he said. He tapped and held the screen so the camera framed my face and the porch and the bags and the ocean behind. Grace appeared, bright and hurried, already mid-sentence. There you are. Put Dad on. Put me on speaker. I heard the scrape of a stool wherever she was. Do not make this difficult. Everyone knows we are there. You will embarrass me, she said before I could answer. That is not embarrassment, I said. It is clarity. Her friends murmured on the other end, the kind of sound people make when they want to be part of the chapter where someone wins. Evan angled the phone so she could see the bags and the coolers and the shape of the house behind my shoulder. He narrated like a realtor. Look at this, Grace. Perfect. He turned the screen back to me, and there was my daughter on a rectangle, watching me like a judge deciding if a bench can carry more weight than it should. Dad, she said with the patient tone people reserve for toddlers and the elderly. We drove 6 hours. We told everyone. You do not even use all this space. Please do not be stubborn. I kept my eyes on the threshold. I said I would be thinking about the quiet for a long time, and I intended to start immediately. The friend with the sunburn tried his hand. We can set up in the back, he said. We will stay out of your way. He lifted the blue bag an inch, lowered it, looked at Evan for permission to retreat. None came. Inside the house, something ticked in the kitchen, a small appliance reminding no one to do anything. I looked past Evan and saw 2 glasses by the sink, rings of condensation sweating into the counter. They had let themselves in earlier. They had poured my cold water for their hot mouths and stood in my rooms when I was not home. The air in the hallway still carried their cologne, a cheap citrus that tried too hard. Evan raised the phone higher and tapped the volume. He wanted the porch to hear my daughter's voice. He wanted the ocean to watch me bend. He wanted his friends to witness a ceremony where the older man agrees to be furniture. Grace spoke as if reading lines. We are family. We share what we have. You said that. You always said that. You promised. I did not remember promising access without asking. I remembered buying salt for winter and cleaning gutters in sideways rain and writing checks for tuition I could barely cover. I remembered going to work on mornings when the car felt like the only warm place on earth. I remembered holding her bike steady, then letting go when the wheels asked for it. I did not remember promising any man a view he did not earn. You can stay a weekend, I said. Not a month. You will ask next time. You will wait for the answer. Evan laughed and walked a slow circle as if demonstrating patience in front of an audience. He spoke to the phone, not to me. Do you hear this? He is being unreasonable. He is not well. He needs company. The friend with the beer put it down on the deck rail without thinking. They can leave a ring. Something small in me took a photograph of that ring and put it with the glasses by the sink. Evidence that people who call you rigid will always be careless with what is not theirs. Grace kept going. She had the stamina for a speech when she was scared. She listed the reasons our family deserved rest. She mentioned how stress had changed me. She said something about the doctor and how isolation was not healthy. I said I was not isolated. I was alone by choice. There is a difference. Evan moved closer until the glass held both of our faces, mine calm and his tight with a smile that did not reach where smiles are born. He wanted the reflection to make us look like a team. It did not. He said, "This is how you want to be remembered then." He lifted his chin toward the house. So much space for one man. I kept my voice even. I said space is not the problem. Permission is. He shrugged in a way that meant, you will come around, because you always do. He told the friends to bring the bags inside. I did not move. The friend with the sunburn lifted a handle and stopped when I did nothing more than breathe deeper. We stood in a small deadlock of men who know the next inch matters. Evan put Grace on speaker and held the phone between us like a weapon designed by a company that had studied families. Dad, she said, let them in. Let us not make this ugly. It is already ugly, I said. It got ugly the moment you decided my door was a suggestion. He tried anger next. He told me what people would think. He mentioned neighbors and Facebook and the way stories grow legs. He said no one would understand a father doing this. He used the word father like it still controlled a gate in me. A breeze moved through and lifted a corner of the tag on the beach chair. It flicked against the plastic and made a small impatient sound. I watched the tag flap and realized what bothered me most. Not the luggage, not the beer ring, not even the audacity of his performance. It was the evidence that the story had already been written somewhere else without me. Reservations in their heads, announcements online. A plan set like concrete I was supposed to walk into while it dried around my ankles. "We are done arguing," I said. He rolled his eyes and called me dramatic. He told Grace I was making a scene. He raised the phone high like a referee and said, "Talk sense into him." On the screen, she looked past me at the water, and it was the water she wanted, not me. I felt it the way you feel a hairline crack under a boot before the pop. I did not feel anger. I felt the measurement in my bones. I pulled the door inward just enough for my shoulder, stepped inside, and looked at Evan through the glass. He started to talk again, faster now that the audience was losing light. I raised the key, small and honest, and let him see it. "You are locking family out," he said, trying for that last barbed sentence that can make someone drop the thing they need to hold. "No," I said. "I am locking peace in." I turned the deadbolt. The click was clean. The sound traveled through the frame into my palm. On the other side, Evan kept moving his mouth. The phone kept putting my daughter's words into the air. The ocean kept its count. I stood there and let the silence on my side swell until it filled the room and pushed the noise away. I set the key on the counter beside the bank notice. Ink on paper, number on a date. The kind of truth that does not require an audience. Then I walked to the study and reached for a pen. The nib met paper with a sound like a promise kept too late but still kept. For once, the knock on the door was not a demand. It was deliverance. I stood with my palm on the wood and watched the blue wash of a cruiser paint the hallway in slow pulses. The house breathed with me. The lock rested under my hand like a heartbeat that had decided to keep going. Evan tried to get there first. He started speaking before the officer had stepped off the gravel. He pointed at the porch, at the bags, at me through the glass, building a story out of volume and shape. A family man in need of compassion, an elderly father in need of supervision. The ocean threw his words back in pieces. The officer did not hurry. He took in the porch, the mat, the scuff of a beer can ring on the rail, the faces of two men who had already begun to regret their role. His jacket creaked when he lifted a hand in greeting. He asked if we could talk. I opened the door a careful width and stepped out. The night air slid around my shoulders and steadied my spine. He asked if I was safe. "I am now," I said. He was the kind of man who kept his voice in the middle of the road. He asked simple questions and let the pauses do most of the work. I told him my name, that I lived alone, that I was fine, that I wanted a quiet evening in my own home. He nodded and turned to Evan with the same measured face. He asked if there was written permission to be on the property. Evan spoke about family. He spoke about plans. He spoke about how it would look to the neighbors if a father turned away his own. The officer listened to all of it as if it were weather, unavoidable, and not worth arguing with. He repeated the simplest line the situation could bear. "Without permission, this is a trespass." He kept his hands open and loose at his sides while he said it, as if to prove that even the law knows how not to clench. Evan tried a different door. He said I had been under stress. He said someone should keep an eye on me. He said he was helping. The officer glanced at me and back at him. His head moved a fraction, not a nod, not a shake, just a small refusal to carry another man's insinuations. He suggested the bags go back to the car. He suggested the evening find its way to separate places. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The friend with the sunburn lifted a handle and did not look at anyone while he did it. The other man gathered the loose chairs and fumbled the stack so that the new tags fluttered again, impatient as moths. Evan held his ground for a breath too long, the way some men do when they have built their face for the moment and then watch it fail. Grace came through the speaker in his hand with the last of her insistence, a voice brittle with the altitude of expectation. The officer did not speak on the phone. He spoke to the person standing in the woods. Some warnings sound like mercy. He told Evan this address would be noted. He told him any return without an invitation would be an incident and not a conversation. He told him to go home. Evan swallowed a retort he could not afford and turned toward the steps. He carried his performance down the path and let the darkness take the edges off it. Tires moved, gravel settled. The porch remembered how to be a place for quiet shoes. The officer stayed a moment longer. Some people know there is an aftershock to saying no. He asked a second time if I was safe. I said I was. He let his light sweep the porch once more and landed on the door handle. The blue reflection made the metal look like it had a steady sky trapped inside it. He said if anything changed, I should call. His card sat small and rectangular in my palm, a bright edge in a dark pocket. He left without ceremony. The cruiser rolled away with the calm of a settled fact. Silence arrived with weight and then eased off. I stood where I was and watched the last pulse of blue thin itself on the hallway wall until only the lamp glow remained. The house fell back into its humming, the kind of sound that means nobody is asking for anything. I closed the door. The latch met the strike plate with the satisfaction of two parts made for each other and replaced in time. Grace sent a message I did not open. The preview was enough. Words arranged to make me break in her story. Words that use concern as a handle. Emotion has a way of trying to pick you up by the places you forgot to protect. I slid the phone into the drawer with the envelopes and the spare keys and let it be dark among objects that were finished with their jobs. In the kitchen, I rinsed the rail with a cloth until the small ring faded. It was not about the aluminum. It was about the ritual of removing other people's fingerprints from the edges of your day. I wiped the condensation circle from the counter where earlier strangers had set their mouths down and called it sharing. The cloth came away damp and clean. Small victories leave the room lighter than it was. I walked back to the door and looked again at the handle. The metal held a dull glow. For the first time since I turned the key that afternoon, I felt something close to softness move through my chest. Not relief. Relief belongs to those who win against something. This felt like correctness finally wearing its own shoes. In the study, the window was a darker rectangle where the horizon used to be. I sat and let the chair accept my weight. I could hear the ocean leaning into the cliffs and then letting go. I could hear the heater do its low work. I could hear my breath behave itself. The desk had a stack of folders I had been avoiding for months. They were not heavy. They were just honest. Justice begins with no. It is a small word that refuses to explain itself. I had used it tonight and the room had learned its shape. Now it needed a spine. I reached for the top folder and laid it open. Inside were the things you keep because you think you might need to remember what you already know. Statements, transfers, dates that shook hands with other dates. Patterns are trying to introduce themselves. A shimmer of color brushed the wall. The last of the cruiser's blue, thrown back by a passing window or a late turn at the end of the lane, flickered and disappeared. The study went still. The screen of my laptop lifted on its hinges, and the soft electronic sky filled the room. A smaller blue now. Not a warning. A field to write on. Keys hummed under my fingers. Names lined up in columns. Amounts found their rows. I did not hurry. I let the cursor blink until it meant patience instead of doubt. Outside, the sea kept counting. Inside, a ledger began to learn the truth I had been avoiding. The house carried the weight without complaint. The lamp poured a clean circle of light on the desk. The screen glowed the same blue that had just let me breathe. The door behind me did not ask for anything. It held. Numbers do not lie. People do. The laptop opened like a small blue window in a quiet house, and the cells waited the way a clean sheet waits for handwriting that will not forgive itself later. I typed my name into the bank portal and the screen filled with years that should have been easy to live with. The cursor blinked. The ocean breathed through the glass in slow counts. I began. Checking. Savings. Credit cards. The old joint account I kept alive too long because memory is lazy and loves convenience. Transfers labeled help. Memos that read just until Friday and almost there, and we will fix this next month. I sorted by recipient. I sorted by date. I sorted by a kind of shame you can only see when a number wears it. A ledger does not take sides. It offers a mirror without flattery. The first year was small and scattered. A tow charge. 2 months of rent when a landlord wanted certainty. A laptop for development that looked exactly like a laptop for entertainment. The second year grew thicker. The third year learned confidence. The fourth year forgot how to be embarrassed. The fifth year decided the bridge would hold anything they rolled across it. Every receipt was a confession she never made. I read them with the care I used to save for strain diagrams. Grocery orders are paid when their card is declined. An insurance premium is covered on the last day of grace. A tax penalty that felt like a scolding aimed at the wrong person. My thumb went cold where it rested on the trackpad. I scrolled anyway. There were the wires to the company account under Evan's name. Not large enough to look like an investment, not rare enough to look like kindness. Sums that fit easily inside a story about responsibility. Sums that add to something you cannot lift without admitting it is heavy. A late-night zell from me to him when Grace sent a message about the car refusing to start on a freeway shoulder. A reimbursement he promised within a week that never returned. A series of cash withdrawals the month they moved apartments because a landlord wanted more proof than potential. The cells began to take on a color. It is the color that comes when a pattern reveals the picture it was always sketching. I grouped everything that touched their lives. The software turned the list into columns that looked cleaner than the choices that birthed them. I copied the total to the bottom. I have not pressed enter yet. I looked at the window and saw the faint ghost of my face there. I let the number wait for me. When I pressed enter, the sum resolved into something I could not call a mistake. 6 figures and a companion that did not mind being seen. I breathed once. Then I checked again. Another account. Another credit card. The charge where I added Grace as an authorized user and told myself it was practical. The time I covered the hospital copay because Evan's temporary coverage had a gap, and the gap was always somehow mine to cross. The cell at the bottom adjusted itself after each addition and behaved like a judge who does not raise her voice. I printed the first list. The printer coughed awake and then found its rhythm. The sheet slid out and landed on the tray with the soft slap of something more honest than anyone in this story had been until now. The next list followed, then another. The room filled with the faint warm smell of ink. The steady click of gears found its way under my ribs and matched a beat there. I stacked the papers and ran a hand along the edges until they squared. The stack looked harmless. That is how ruins behave before you give them names. I traced back to the sale of the inland house without thinking of the word regret. There were wires I had almost forgotten. There were smaller gifts from before the move and larger ones after. Some duplicates smelled like carelessness hidden inside urgency. I found 2 payments for the same deposit made within 4 days. I found a subscription to a service I never used attached to my card because the trial had auto-renewed and no one told me. In the memo, Grace had typed, "Never worry, we will fix it." The months marched, and no one did. The clock on the stove blinked a time I did not remember setting. The ocean pressed against the cliffs and exhaled. I went back 5 years exactly, the cell filled with a sum that turned my mouth dry. More than 180,000 had flowed out of my accounts and into Evan's hands in 5 slow years. The figure did not accuse. It did not even scold. It sat there like a weight on a table that had begun to sag in the center. I read the number again without the commas. It looked more like a room than a number. It looked like square footage. It looked like a set of keys traded for someone else's plan. I opened the drawer where the spare keys live and took one out to feel the shape of a promise. Metal melts into a palm quickly. Paper does not. The stack of printouts leaned left. I kept them upright with a finger and did not trust the shaking to be only age. Next, I opened letters I had filed untouched because a quiet man believes quiet mail can wait. Insurance summaries. A notice about a loan application I did not make. A marketing letter congratulating me on pre-approval based on my excellent payment history. The bank owed me politeness. It was all they ever owed me. I set the letter aside and made another list. People you have been to yourself. Provider. Backup plan. The soft part that catches knives. On the screen I made a final tab. It was only headings at first. Date, recipient, amount, category, outcome. Under outcome I wrote the words that mattered in small, honest script. Returned, not returned, promised, denied, ghosted. I filled 40 lines before I understood I was building a vocabulary for a weather report that had been hitting this shore for years. I wanted to be angry. Anger is a warm jacket in a cold room. It zips all the way up and lets you feel large for a minute. I did not put it on. The numbers would not have liked the way it looked on me. I stayed with the columns. I let the totals tell me what kind of father I had been. Not generous, not foolish, just someone who mistook a series of small exceptions for love. I found the day Grace persuaded me to sell the old place and the wire that followed, and the message she sent with a heart and a sentence about breathing deeper by the water. I found the month Evan insisted a micro-investment would secure a macro partner, and the money that followed and the silence that parented it. I found the times I called what I was doing helping, and the times they called it nothing at all. I pressed print again. The printer worked as if it could not imagine failure. The house seemed to lean forward to listen. The pages slid into a new stack. I clipped them with a small metal bite and felt the bite in my own mouth as if I had said something truer than I liked. I wrote on the top sheet in a corner where only I would see it. Enough. The kettle clicked, and I poured water over tea like a man caring for a body he has ignored. The steam rose and took the smell of paper with it and softened it into something I could breathe. I stood at the counter and let the cup warm the side of my hand. I thought of Grace as a child, asking why bridges must be beautiful if they are already strong. I thought of what beauty had been used to hide. I thought of the simplicity I had always admired in steel, and how it had taken numbers to remind me that a home has load limits too. The phone sat where I had left it, a small rectangle that had pretended to be a door and often behaved like a trap. I did not pick it up. I packed the papers into a manila folder and slid it closed. I wrote a label on the tab that meant nothing to anyone else. Project. I did not need to call it by its true name yet. That would come soon enough in a room with a desk heavier than mine. I shut down the laptop and let the screen go dark. The blue bled away and left the room to the sound of the ocean and the soft breathing of appliances that ask nothing from you but a bill. I listened to the printer cool. The house adjusted itself around me with soft joints. I set the folder near the door where keys and resolve wait for mornings. When I turned off the light, the window became a mirror again. A man stood there with a bag under his arm and a line between his eyes that had not been there when life was simpler. He did not look broken. He looked measured. He looked like someone who had finally accepted the weight and stopped pretending he could carry it by feel alone. The night kept its side of the bargain. No cars on the lane, no voices hurrying toward what they wanted, just the sea and the breath you learn to take when you are finished apologizing. I slept like a witness whose testimony has been recorded. Morning arrived without opinion. I woke before the gulls and dressed in the quiet. The folder waited by the door. The printer ticked once and went still. When I lifted the handle, the latch gave that certain contact I had come to trust. The porch air was cool. The lane was empty. I locked the door and put the key away. The folder felt heavier than paper when I carried it down the hall at the office building later. The fluorescents hummed like they remembered me. Shoes clicked. A receptionist looked up. The name on the frosted glass ahead said this was a place where facts could be sharpened and returned with edges. My steps found the slow rhythm of a man ready to let a different kind of math speak for him. Some wars are won by filing cabinets, not fists. I felt that truth in the receptionist's nod, in the soft hum of fluorescents that have seen more surrender than any battlefield. The corridor smelled like paper and polish. My shoes clicked in a rhythm I recognized from another life, the cadence of a man who has decided to be done explaining. Clara Dunn opened her office door before I reached it. She had the steady look of someone who knows how to separate noise from evidence. Yellow folders sat squared on her desk. The color was bright in a way that did not ask permission. She offered water I did not need and a chair that understood weight. I set my folder down. It thumped more than paper should. She turned the stack and started reading. She did not comment at first. The room filled with small sounds. Pages lifted and lowered. A pen touched a margin and left a quick mark. She spread my lists like a map and let the routes show themselves. When she looked up, her eyes had no surprise left in them, only the care people bring to broken things when they know they can be repaired. She asked me to tell it once from the beginning, and I did, without decoration. She listened with her hands flat on the desk and her breath even. When I finished, she nodded once and slid my totals to the top. Her voice had a center. She said my file was complete. She said the pattern was clear. She said we would keep our language calm and our steps visible. She outlined the first moves with the ease of a person pulling tools from a drawer she tends to every day. A written notice to vacate, properly served. 30 days, because they are occupants without a lease. Document delivery. Keep a log. Install cameras only in common areas. Save every message. Do not respond online. Do not feed what is already hungry. She paused, then tapped the yellow folder nearest my hand. They will call it cruel, she said. Then they will finally call me something true, I said. She did not smile at that. She nodded. She has heard the sentence in many accents. She moved on. You will protect the rest of your life, she said. That begins with structure. A will invites argument. A revocable trust invites order. We will move assets into a living trust with you as trustee while you are well. You will name a successor trustee later. You can direct distributions to causes you believe in. You can leave a portion to your daughter with conditions if you choose. The trust keeps your intentions from being dragged through a room crowded with opinions. It is clean. It is quiet. Something unlocked in my ribs when she said the word quiet. I watched her hands as she arranged papers. She had the unhurried economy of a person who expects to be taken seriously. She slid a sample declaration toward me. I read and did not choke on the language. This was not the gray fog of legalese. This was the grammar of boundaries spoken in ink. She asked about beneficiaries. I said I wanted the work of my life to make shelter for people who had none. Veterans housing, job training, real walls, and a door that answers only to the person who lives behind it. She wrote it down with a neat hand. She did not look at me to confirm the meaning. She trusted that I knew what I had just said. She asked if I wanted to include my daughter. Yes, I said after a breath. I counted, but in a way that would not harm her or me. A portion later. Not now. Not as a lever. Not as a promise that invites performance. She made 2 lists. The first was for today. Draft the notice. Prepare an evidence binder. Begin the trust documents. Update beneficiary designations where possible. Remove authorized users who should never have been. Freeze credit temporarily to keep strangers from opening doors in my name. Change emergency contacts. She wrote each step like a rung on a ladder designed by someone who knows height is nothing without stability. The second list was for the next week. Title work for the trust. A pour-over provision to catch anything not named. A no-contest clause to cool the appetite of people who mistake litigation for love. A letter of wishes to explain the parts that the trust does not explain. She said the explanation is optional. I said silence has done enough talking. Give me a letter. We worked through details with the briskness of a weather front. Names of banks, account numbers, the address of the house that used to hold our holidays, the dates of transfers I had tried not to remember. She was careful when she touched those dates. She did not make them heavier than they already were. She asked if I had told anyone I was here. I said no. She said, good. We will tell them with paper when the time is right. I signed authorizations and felt the old muscle memory wake up in my hand. My name has been many things. Tonight, it was a boundary line that could not be stepped across without consequence. The pen left quiet trails where once there was only apology. The yellow folders thickened and then thinned as she assembled what needed to leave with me and what would stay to become more than intention. She leaned back and looked at me a second time as if to confirm I was the same man who had walked in. She said, you will be tempted to explain. You will be told that a father's first duty is generosity. I said generosity has lived here without rent for too long. She nodded. Then let your first duty be stewardship, she said. You are not closing a door on love. You are closing a door on harm. People confuse those on purpose because it keeps the door open. I felt something like sorrow touch the back of my throat and then pass. Not the kind that drowns you, the kind you can nod to as it goes by. I asked her how to deliver the notice without turning it into a theater. She said we will keep it plain. Deliver it politely. A copy for each. A witness, if possible. A photo of the delivery, if needed. Do not let it become a scene. A scene is what they want. The point of a scene is to blur facts with feelings until nobody can count. I laughed softly. Counting is all I have done for 2 nights, I said. Good, she said. Keep counting. We will make the numbers do their job. We stood. She gathered the papers that were mine now and pressed the edges into a clean line. She slid them into a yellow folder and wrote a label with a black pen. The letters looked like they could stand up by themselves if you asked them to. She placed the folder in my hands, and the weight felt right. She asked if I had someone to call if I felt pressure after I left. I said I had the ocean and a neighbor who offers her number like a blessing without question. She approved of both. At the door, she paused and added one more thing. When you leave this room, you will hear names meant to shrink you. Stubborn, ungrateful, old. Let them hang in the air until they fall. We will not be answering names. We will be answering claims. I nodded. Some instruction lands like a benediction. She pressed a stamp into an ink pad and onto the notice with the firm swing of a gavel that she had done before. The sound met the desk with a solid thunk. It traveled up my arm and settled on my shoulders. Paper had become something else. Not a request, not a plea, a boundary that would not explain itself twice. Outside, the late light of the corridor felt cooler than when I walked in. The fluorescent hum did not bother me now. It sounded like a long hallway agreeing with its purpose. The yellow folder rode under my arm as if it had always belonged there. The building's glass door gave way, and the air off the street carried a promise I recognized. Not freedom, not yet. Trajectory. In the car, I set the folder on the passenger seat and buckled it without irony. The belt clicked like a small oath. Traffic moved without drama. The lane toward the coast evened out under my tires. I drove without the radio. The engine and the road said enough. At a stoplight, my phone buzzed where I had buried it. The screen lit the interior in a colder shade than daylight. A message previewed itself without my permission. The first words were public and father, and how could he? I let the phone face down in the console. The buzzed tone echoed once and then again, persistent as weather. Somewhere on a screen, my name was being used to hold up a story I had not written. I tightened my grip on the wheel and felt the work in my hands. Ahead, the sky lowered toward the water and found its blue. I followed it home with the yellow folder steady at my side and the stamp's sound still in my bones. Their words flooded the internet. Mine stayed locked in a folder named Evidence. I did not answer a single post. I watched them bloom and wither like weeds after a storm. Grace wrote about a father in decline. She wrote about safety and concern and how love sometimes needs to make hard choices. Evan reposted her plea with a photo of a sunset that was not mine, a caption about healing, and a hint that I was not safe to be left alone. Strangers added their outrage freely. Cousins I had not heard from in a decade discovered their voices in my name. The first call came from an uncle who likes to lecture. He wanted context, but only if it matched what he had already decided. The next was from a neighbor in the old town who swore he had always known I was brittle. I let both calls pass into voicemail and then into the trash. You do not feed a fire you intend to outlive. Clara had told me that. Let paper speak. Let tools do their jobs. I set up the cameras the day after her advice. Small devices that did not argue. One in the hallway facing the garage. One in the living room angled toward the back door. One is in the utility room where the furnace control panel lives behind a narrow door. The red light pulsed once when each was connected. A steady blink like a heartbeat that is not fooled by words. I tested the alert on my phone. It hummed, then fell still. The house returned to its quiet like a cat returning to a warm spot. Grace's posts found new angles. I was isolating. I was shutting out family. I was refusing help. She used the word help until it lost its shape. Friends of friends began to comment about resources for aging parents. A distant relative offered a hotline number. Evan chimed in with a sentence about dignity. He is a man who throws confetti on a parade he did not organize and calls it leadership. I went for groceries in the late afternoon. The store was almost empty. The cashier glanced at me with the soft look people give to someone they think they have read about. I told myself she had only slept badly. On the drive home, the lane down to my place glittered in that specific way. Salt air makes pavement look thinner than it is. I pulled into the drive and my phone shook in my pocket. The hallway camera had seen motion, then the utility room, then silence. The timestamps made a neat row. I stepped out of the car and stood still enough to hear my blood. I looked toward the garage. The door was closed exactly as I had left it. The house kept its neutral face. Inside, the air was wrong, cooler than it should be. The heater blew but did not warm. I felt the kind of calm that is not peace at all. I followed the path the camera had drawn. The utility door stood open 2 inches. The light inside was still on. The furnace panel hung loose from one screw, a cheap mouth made to gape. A wire lay like a vein cut on purpose. I closed my eyes and saw the red blink of the camera in that close space. It had watched without opinion while a hand tested my boundary and found soft tissue. The phone hummed again. The app offered a thumbnail. Evan's face tilted a fraction toward the lens as if checking his own reflection in the truth. The clip played without sound at first. He came through the garage with a code he should not have, a keypad he remembered from the time we called what we had trust. He walked like a man who expected to be forgiven ahead of time. He opened the panel without hesitation. He tugged a wire and then another. He looked up and saw the red dot and smiled in the sour way people smile when they realize their show has a mirror. He covered the dot with his thumb a second too late. Then he left by the door he had let himself in through, closing it softly like a courteous thief. I called a technician and paid full price for speed. He climbed the narrow steps to the utility room and whistled low when he saw the panel. He asked if a contractor had been in here. I said no. He said the good news is that nothing is broken. The bad news is that someone wanted it to feel broken. He reconnected what had been taken apart. He wrote the invoice with a steady hand. The number was smaller than the number in my head. It was not the money that mattered. It was the message. I asked him to leave his card and to note the time. He did, and looked at me with the curiosity of someone who understands he is walking through more than a service call. Evan returned as the sun lowered. He came with the swagger turned down, the humble setting engaged. He carried a small toolbox like a prop from a play about redemption. He lifted his hand as if to knock and then did not. He spoke through the door in that friendly tone the guilty use when they are rehearsing for court. "Old man, you need help with that heater. I know a guy." I opened the door half an inch. I kept my shoulder against the wood. "You broke the heater," I said. "Mistakes happen," he said. "Not twice on camera," I said. For a second his face was empty of performance. Something gray moved across it like weather across flat land. He looked past me into the hallway as if a different answer might be walking toward him. Then he tried a smile that had nowhere to live. "You cannot record people without permission," he said. "I can record what enters my house," I said. He shifted into anger the way a car snaps into a lower gear on a hill. "You think you can do this to us? You think you can humiliate us and walk away?" He started to raise his voice, then caught himself, then raised it anyway. "People already think you are not right. You are proving them correct." I kept my voice even. "Some of us have proof," I said. Then I shut the door without slamming. The latch made its small, honest sound. "It is a luxury to choose your noise." He stayed on the porch long enough to say words he wanted me to wear. I let them slide off the paint. The camera in the hallway watched the space where a man had been. The red light blinked, impartial as stars. Inside, I set the technician's invoice beside the manila folder. I sat at the desk and moved the mouse until the screen rose into its blue again. I saved the clip and watched it twice, once with the volume off and once with the sound of Evan's shoes on the garage concrete, a hollow beat that told me the exact pace of his certainty. I noted the timestamps and wrote them in a small square hand that had measured other kinds of load. I attached the file and the invoice to a message addressed to Clara. The subject line was plain: utility room. I added a single sentence: "The house is learning to defend itself." I clicked send. The sound was a soft tick that felt like glass settling back into its frame. The phone lit again with a flood of notifications. Grace's latest post had found more friends. A picture from her wedding day. A paragraph about how quickly fathers can become strangers. Comments bloomed like mold under a damp sink. People wrote long and cared more than they should have. A few warned her to be cautious about defamation. Their comments got buried under the warmth of louder people. I set the phone down face down. The red camera light blinked in the corner of my vision. The house hummed low and steady. The heater blew warm again, and the hall lost its chill. I brewed tea and held the cup with both hands until the heat reached the islands of ache I carry and told them to quiet down. Outside, a fine rain began. the kind that makes the ocean look like it is breathing from a different set of lungs. The first drops found the deck and made a soft percussion that slowed my heart to match it. I stood in the doorway to the study and watched the weather take the sharpness out of the day. People believe noise wins. They believe the last loud line owns the room. It does not. Truth does not need to shout. It needs to be present and patient and recorded. The red light in the hall flicked again and did not tire. Somewhere in town, someone typed my name into a story I would not recognize. In my house, the record was already complete. I closed the laptop and listened to the rain take hold. The drop pattern thickened, then steadied, then turned the world outside into a single calm sound. I let it wash the words off the day until only facts remained. A folder on a desk. A list in a hand that no longer trembles. A house that knows how to hold its temperature. The night moved closer to the glass. The rain stitched its slow seam between me and whatever came next. The only sound in court louder than anger is paper sliding across wood. It has a way of telling the room who is about to be believed. I sat beside Clara and watched her set our file on the table with the same care a builder gives a level. Tabs in calm colors. Dates that knew where they had been. The clerk called our case, and the room narrowed to a channel where only facts could pass. Grace and Evan arrived late enough to wobble their confidence. She wore the kind of dress that asks for sympathy. He wore a suit that had learned the word, almost. Their lawyer cleared his throat and announced this was a family misunderstanding that belonged in a living room, not a courtroom. He spoke about compassion and history and the hardships of modern life. He did not once speak about permission. The judge listened without leaning. When he finished, she asked if there was any agreement on paper that gave them the right to stay. He talked about implied understandings and tradition. The judge waited the way the ocean waits for our weather. Then she turned to Clara. Clara stood as if she had been born standing in rooms like this. She placed the notice on the table for the clerk to mark and then moved to the bench. She summarized the timeline with sentences that did not need to apologize for their edges. Delivery of the notice is documented, the log of dates and messages, the technician's invoice for the furnace. The hallway and utility room clips on a drive that the bailiff carried to a small screen. The neighbor's statement about late noise and early cars. She did not hurry. She let the file do the work it was built to do. Evan shifted in his chair when the video still froze on his face. His jaw tightened. The screen did not care. The judge looked at the still and then at him. She did not ask a question. Clara moved on. The record of transfers and the pattern of support were not the issue today, she said, and the judge nodded once as if to say, yes, we will keep this clean. The issue was the house and the right to control who crossed its threshold. Grace tried to catch my eye. I kept mine on the grain of the council table. There is a kind of wood that remembers storms without showing scars. I wanted to be that wood. I wanted to be a part of the room that did not beg. Their lawyer rose again and attempted volume where evidence would not come. He said it would damage a family for the court to side with a father who had turned cold. He said this was about love. The judge held up a hand and the air settled. She asked Grace a single question. Ms. Mercer, do you have any proof of payment to your father for the time you lived in his home? Rent, utilities, property costs, anything with numbers on it? Silence opened and walked the rows. Grace's mouth took the shape of reasons. None of them left. She looked to her lawyer and then to Evan and then at the floor. Finally, she said, "No, Your Honor." The judge turned one page and read something only she needed to see. She spoke to the room in the tone of a weather report you trust. This is not a family therapy session. This is a matter of possession. The notice was proper. The response was not. The court orders that the premises be delivered back to the owner by the deadline at the end of the month. She added language about returning without permission and what that would become. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. A gavel is a small piece of wood with a memory. When it met the block, the sound traveled through the table into my hands and then down into the part of my spine that decides whether a man sleeps. In that strike, there was more than order. There was a kind of birth, not something new, of something I had misplaced and finally found again. Their lawyer began to ask about a stay. The judge said the order stands. He began to suggest a compromise. The judge said the law has already been compromised enough. Grace's eyes found me then and held as if she could reel me back in by refusing to blink. The bailiff called the next case. We stood because the room told us to. In the hallway, the sound was carpet and air conditioning. Evan's face boiled up red, and then he tried to force a smile. He leaned toward me with his palms up like a man selling forgiveness at a discount. "You did this to your own," he said. "People will know." I said, "Let them know what the record says." Clara moved between us like a door that closes gently but all the way. Grace stepped closer. Her voice had no top note left. "You could have handled this privately," she said. "You did not have to drag me through it. I said I asked for privacy when I asked for a door that stayed closed." She lifted her chin and reached for a story to live inside. It did not come. She walked away with her phone already in her hand, summoning a world that would speak the lines she needed to hear. Clara and I did not linger. She said the order is clear. She said we would file the final pieces today, so the calendar does not slip. She reminded me not to narrate my victory to anyone online. The file is enough. It has been enough all along. Outside, sunlight hit the stone steps and spread in a way that made everything look finished. I thanked her. Thank you was not the right size for what she had given me. It was what I had. I drove out of the garage and felt the city loosen its grip on the wheel. The on-ramp to the highway opened like a throat clearing. The afternoon tilted toward the coast, and the air cooled inside the car even before I touched the dial. I did not turn on the radio. The courtroom settled itself again in the hum of the tires, paper sliding across wood. The question that took the air out of the room. "Ms. Mercer, any proof?" "No, Your Honor." The gavel, the end of the month. The simple math of a door that will close and be respected. The road found its line along the water. Wind pushed at the car and then relented. Waves worked the rocks with the patience of creatures who have no clocks. The sound of the gavel folded into the surf and then returned as the same thing. A measured strike. A count that does not care how you feel about it. I rolled down the window and let the salt into my lungs. At home, the hallway smelled like paper and lemon oil. I set the thin copy of the order on the counter without ceremony. I did not need to read it. My hands already knew what it said. I walked to the back door and opened it to the deck. The ocean did its old work. The light did what light has always done to rooms that choose not to be afraid. Justice does not need revenge. It needs recognition. The judge had given it a shape and a date. I stood there with that fact and watched the horizon keep its line. In the distance, a small boat moved left to right in slow honesty. It did not try to be anything but a boat. It stayed where the water would carry it, and when the wave lifted it, it let itself be lifted. When the wave set it down, it allowed that too. My phone began to vibrate against the wood, messages from numbers I knew and names I did not. I let it sing without picking it up. There are days when you are done talking, even to a device. I brewed coffee for no reason but the smell, and sat at the table while the cup cooled beside the order. The silence was not empty. It was clean. The door held. The sea kept counting. I could feel the new month moving toward me with a promise I understood. Not a promise that everyone would be kind. A promise that the rooms I pay for would be rooms I could trust. They left before dawn, but their anger stayed nailed to the walls. The house was quiet in the way a stage is quiet after the audience goes home. The front door swung inward, and the air that met me was cold and slightly sweet, the smell of a night that tried to erase what it could not forgive. I walked the rooms without comment. On the hallway paint, a long scuff ran shoulder height, a gray brushstroke that began where nerves do. Along the baseboard, a darker smear marked the drag of a suitcase that wanted to be heavier than it was. In the guest room, a dresser drawer hung tired and crooked, one screw a breath from surrender. The bathroom mirror held a thin crack from corner to corner, a hairline you would only see if you were close enough to hear yourself breathe. A towel bar lay on the counter with its brackets still attached, two pale wounds open on the wall where it used to belong. Small things, all of them, but they spoke one language. I took pictures for the file and then put the phone away. I was in no mood to narrate. The ocean kept its count behind the glass, and I matched it without trying. In the kitchen, a single plate sat in the sink as if waiting to be absolved. I filled the basin and watched the water turn the film on the surface into nothing. When I dried the plate and set it in the cabinet, the act felt larger than the dishes. The master bedroom was mostly how I had left it. My side of the closet still smelled like cedar. Her side smelled like air. I opened the top drawer of the dresser and found space where her watch had lived for years. A small square of velvet with a clean rectangle in the middle, the kind of absence that is louder than any sound. I stood with my fingers on the edge of the drawer until the pulse in my thumb slowed. I pictured her wrist in the car window light on some old Saturday, the way the second hand ticked like a crisp metronome while she tapped time on the door. There are things you lose that fight you on the way out. This did not. It felt like something that had been inching toward the door for a long time and finally found it open. I waited for anger, and it did not come. What came was a steadiness I had not met before, a certainty that some objects carry a grief you must not keep. By the back door, a chair sat at an angle I did not recognize. I squared it on the table, and then I brewed coffee. The kettle's sigh and the small burr of the grinder brought the room back to its ordinary size. I poured and held the cup in both hands. Steam lifted, turned, and went invisible. The house exhaled with me. Clara called as the mug began to cool. She asked if I had walked through. I told her I had. She asked if anything important was missing. I told her about the watch and said that an important target is a moving target. She was quiet for a moment, and then, in the voice that had steered me through worse rooms, she asked if I would press charges. I told her no. They have already sentenced themselves. She did not argue. She said we would note what needed noting and move on to repairs and whatever came after. Then she reminded me to keep the receipt for the mirror and the towel bar. I said I would. We let the line go still with nothing left that needed saying. I made a list on a yellow pad because lists have a way of turning air back into ground. Replace the mirror. Rehang the bar with new anchors. Tighten dresser hardware. Paint over the scuff in the hall with the leftover can in the garage. Call a carpenter for the drawer slide I did not trust. Call a cleaner for the carpets that had learned other people's feet. Call the technician for a full system check, even though the heat was holding now. The pen moved, and the page answered. It is a relief to ask a room for simple things and hear it say yes. I opened the windows to let the salt through. The breeze lifted the edge of a receipt near the sink and turned it so I could read the date. I folded it and slid it into an envelope marked household and felt something unhook inside my chest. Not forgiveness. Forgiveness wants to touch what it forgives. This was different. This was the decision not to be touched. On the patio, a faint ring still showed where a can had rested days ago. I wiped it with a damp cloth until the wood returned to its grain. A gull wheeled once overhead and then drifted down the coast toward nothing in particular. The neighbor walked by at her usual hour and lifted 2 fingers without stopping. I returned the salute and went back in. I found pennies under the couch, a button that did not match any shirt I own, and a torn festival wristband that had seen a night I had not been invited to. I swept everything into a small pile and dropped it into a bag I did not intend to keep. The small click it made at the bottom of the bin sounded like a door latch. I vacuumed the rug the slow way and watched the lines of clean pile back over the old tracks. Satisfaction lives in the details if you let it. When the contractor arrived, he walked through the rooms with a practiced eye and wrote numbers down without commentary. He touched the mirror lightly and whistled through his teeth. He said glass is cheaper than most people think, but more dangerous. He told me he could be back by afternoon if I wanted it done before the weekend. I told him that would be fine. He gave me a number that matched what I had expected, and then one slightly higher for the convenience of now. I chose now. He nodded like a man who understands the currency of breathing easier. By midday, the house had a new mirror that reflected a steadier man than the one who had stood in front of it a month ago. The towel bar held when I tugged it. The dresser drawer slid true and closed with a sound you would not notice unless it was off. The scuff in the hallway disappeared under paint that dried a shade darker, but would teach my eye how to stop searching. The contractor left, and the place returned to a single set of footsteps. I took the watch's empty square of velvet and set it on the dresser. I tried to imagine another object sitting there and decided against it. Some blanks are honest. Later, I will choose a small shell from the beach and let it live there as a quiet placeholder. For now, the space could say what it needed. Toward evening, Grace sent a message that said we took only what belonged to us. I did not answer. Belonging is not a feeling. It is a ledger the heart tries to erase and cannot. I placed the phone face down again and returned to the table where my coffee had gone cold. I poured it out and brewed a fresh cup because rituals are bridges when you have pulled others down. Steam rose in a pale ribbon and thinned as it climbed. I sat and listened to the new mirror breathing the same room back at me. The cup warmed my hands, and a small ache in the wrist let me know I was still here to feel it. Outside, the water changed color the way it does when the day begins to forgive itself. Inside, the walls learned the sound of a house that remembered its first purpose. Clara texted one line near sunset. All filings are complete. The words fit in the palm exactly. I set the phone down and looked around. No voices, no suitcases, no righteous speeches bounced off my glass. The place had the hush of a chapel before anyone decided what prayer to say. I stood and walked room to room with the mug in hand, watching the light find small surfaces and make them worth looking at. I did not forget. I will not. Forgetting is a trick that leaves the front door open. I am choosing something else. I am choosing to stop letting them make new marks. The old ones will fade with use. Paint will hold. Wood will heal. The mirror will not cut anyone who approaches it gently. When I reached the kitchen again, the cup was half gone and the steam had thinned to nothing. I rinsed it, set it upside down on the rack, and watched one clear bead slide to the rim and fall. The window over the sink began to brighten in a way that did not belong to evening. The first pale light of the next day was already stepping over the water and into my house. At sunrise, my coffee did not taste like revenge. It tasted like peace. I stood at the kitchen window and watched light cross the water and climb the glass. It moved across the counter and came to rest on the table like a hand saying enough. Steam rose, twisted once, then turned invisible. The house answered with the soft sounds of a place that is no longer braced for impact. I carried the cup to the table and sat where the light pooled. My palms took the heat. My shoulders let go of what they had been holding. The ocean kept its steady count beyond the deck. A gull carved a slow line across the pale sky and did not hurry. Somewhere down the lane, a truck started, idled, and moved on. No voices, no plans are being made for me. The morning was honest in that way. Mornings are when you have survived the night and do not need to prove it. I looked at the order on the counter and did not need to read it again. The paper had already done its work. What remained was smaller and larger at the same time. Smaller because the storm had passed through and could name itself. Larger because quiet leaves you with yourself. I turned the page face down and let light take the space where fear had lived. The heater breathed low and reliably. The mirror down the hall held a clean version of the man who walked past. The chair by the back door sat squared to the table the way I had left it. Small facts, all of them. They are the kind that add up to a life you can inhabit without apology. I lifted the cup and drank. The coffee tasted like something I had earned without taking anything from anyone else. The phone buzzed where I had left it. I let it go once. Twice. I picked it up because not every silence should be mistaken for absence. The screen showed her name, a single line. Maybe someday I will understand. I held the phone and listened to the room. The ocean answered first, then my own breath. I set the phone face down and let the message belong to the air. Some doors you close gently and do not lock. You simply do not walk back through them until they are true again. I rinsed the cup and set it upside down on the rack. Sunlight climbed the wall and lit the frame of the back door until the wood looked almost warm. The key lay on the counter beside the folder Clara had prepared, metal against paper. The two tools that rebuilt the parts of my life I had let other people remodel without permission. People said I changed. Truth is, I just stopped apologizing. I stepped out onto the deck. The boards held. The rail felt dry and certain under my hand. Sea air pressed against my face and left the salt it carries for everyone. Down on the sand, a dog ran a crooked path after nothing in particular and was pleased with himself anyway. A woman in a blue jacket walked with her head up and her hands free. No one looked at my house. No one needed to. A week ago, I would have been composing speeches for other people's comfort. Today, I counted the simple things in front of me and let them be my answer. A cup, a key, A table with sunlight on it. The hum of machines that exist to serve, not command. The steady capacity of a body that has learned where to set its weight. I breathed in and felt my lungs return the favor. Inside, I gathered the small pile of tools on the counter and put them back in the drawer. The camera indicator in the hallway glowed once and then rested. Not a warning now, a reminder. The house has eyes, and so do I. I made a note on the yellow pad for tasks that could wait. Call the charity office about the meeting next week. Pick up more paint to finish the edge near the baseboard. Replace the salt in the small bowl by the door because rituals matter more when the trouble has gone. A text from Clara arrived, brief and finished, all quiet on the docket. She did not need to add instructions. She trusted the spine we had built. I replied with 2 words, thank you. What I meant was more complicated. Gratitude for a language that did not require my grief to be louder than other people's needs. Gratitude for a process that troubles the cruel long enough for the rest of us to breathe. I walked the length of the hallway and paused at the dresser. The small square of velvet waited where her watch used to live. I ran a finger along the space and felt something settle that had been rattling for months. Loss is not a bill to be collected. It is a room you keep swept so you can visit without bleeding. I opened the window and let the salt wind touch the space, the way you open a church on a weekday and let no one in but air. The kettle clicked again as the element cooled. I made a second cup because I liked the sound and the warmth and the fact that I could. I carried it to the table and watched the light of the ocean move over the wood. The grain brightened and then dimmed as a thin cloud passed over the face of the sun. I waited. It cleared. It always does. You simply have to stand still long enough to witness it. The doorbell did not ring. The neighbors did not come with advice. The internet raged somewhere else, where the loud live and tire one another out. Here, the day went about its work. The refrigerator kept food cold. The heater kept the air warm. The house kept its promise. I sipped and let my jaw unclench. My hands stopped trying to perform what they no longer needed to hold. I thought about calling Grace, saying something plain. I am here. I am not a wall. I am a door that can open when the knocking is not a demand. I did not call. Words said into a storm belong to the storm. This was a morning for weather that does not argue. I put the phone back on the counter and walked to the sink and watched a small boat move along the horizon from left to right. Consistent, unimpressed with drama, doing the one job it was built to do. I sat again and placed my palm flat on the table where the light lay. The surface warmed my skin. Not much. Enough. I thought of bridges and load and the simple math that keeps both honest. I thought of how many times I had let love become a reason to ignore the numbers. I thought of the relief that comes when you stop pretending your structure can carry anything anyone drives across it. The cup emptied. I did not rush to refill it. Some satisfaction is better left alone once you have named it. The clock on the stove rolled forward a minute with a firm click. The house breathed. The ocean kept time. In my chest, the muscle that had been busy for too long worked at a pace it could keep. I stood and gathered the cup and the pad and the folder and placed them where they belonged. Nothing dramatic. Order is its own quiet ceremony. I locked the back door and felt the latch meet the strike in one clean line. The sound traveled through wood and into bone. It did not echo. If you had told me a year ago this was what justice would look like, I would have argued for something louder. I know better now. The life I get to live without explaining is the only verdict I needed. No confetti, no speech, just a room I can trust and a day that does not ask me to beg for it. The window brightened one shade more. The view sharpened at the edges. The air in the room held without strain. The shoreline waited and did not threaten. The table carried the print of my hand where the light had been. The view was clear. The house stood still. The morning was mine. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the playlist now showing on screen.